The room went dead silent when she walked in. Katie Morrison didn't announce herself. Didn't introduce herself to the night shift nurse sitting at the station with half-empty coffee and 6 more hours of charting ahead. She just appeared at the threshold of room 347, favoring her left leg slightly, the kind of limp people stopped noticing after the first 30 seconds, the kind that lived in the muscle memory of someone who'd relearned how to walk. The hallway fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical hymn overhead, that constant white noise that became the heartbeat of any hospital after midnight. The smell hit her first. Always did. Not the blood or the sickness, people expected that. It was the antiseptic, the industrial-grade bleach mixed with something chemical and sterile that made the air taste like copper and regret. She'd smelled it 1,000 times in 1,000 different rooms, and her body remembered every single one. The nurse at the station, name tag reading Patricia, RN, looked up from her monitor. Room 347's yours. Webb. 5 years, no change. Vital stable. He's a maintenance case. Routine rounds every 4 hours, nothing complicated. Katie nodded once. That single gesture contained everything she'd learned about appearing smaller than she was. Agreeable. Deferential. New. The kind of nurse who wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't push boundaries, wouldn't be the problem. She'd spent 3 years perfecting this particular performance. 3 years building a civilian life that fit her like borrowed clothes. ICU nursing at Riverside Community Hospital in San Diego was supposed to be simple, stable pay, routine care, no heroes required. Just another new hire RN with a 2-year degree trying to make rent and keep her past where it belonged. Behind her, room 347 existed in a perpetual twilight. The ventilator beside the bed wheezed its mechanical rhythm, pushing air into lungs that hadn't made their own decision in 5 years. Commander Marcus Webb lay motionless beneath a cotton blanket, his frame thin from disuse, his right shoulder slightly elevated to prevent pressure sores. Military dress blues hung in the open closet, the fabric faded to that particular shade of blue that only comes from years of salt air and deployment rotations. Katie moved to the bedside with the economical precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Not for civilians. For Marines. The fall line was patent. The Foley catheter secured properly. The endotracheal tube positioned at 21 centimeters, taped at the commissure with the kind of surgical precision that told her the previous nurse actually cared about the details. She began her assessment without rushing. Temperature, 37.2 Celsius. Heart rate steady at 68. Blood pressure holding at 112/74. The monitor showed a normal sinus rhythm, boring, stable, the kind of cardiac rhythm that suggested a body in stasis rather than decline. Good. Boring was professional. Boring was what they wanted from her. But then Katie reached for his left arm to reposition the 4, and she saw the tattoo. It was old. Probably 5 years old or more. The ink faded to that particular shade of blue-gray that came from the kind of parlor you found in towns near military bases. It ran along the inside of his forearm, the letters in a precise military font, K. Morrison, Angel of Mosul. Katie's hands did not shake. Her breath did not catch. Her face remained exactly as neutral as it had been 3 seconds before. But something inside her chest became very still and very heavy, like a helicopter landing on a roof that wasn't built for it. She looked at his face. Really looked at it for the first time. The scar tissue along his left temporal lobe from the shrapnel, she'd seen it in the chart. The reconstructive surgery on his jaw. The way his right eye didn't track at all, the pupil blown and fixed. She'd seen all of that. But now she recognized the shape of his face beneath the damage, the line of his nose, the hands that had pulled her out of a burning rubble pile in a market district she'd never be able to forget. Katie set his arm back down very carefully. She resumed her charting as if nothing had happened. As if the past 5 years hadn't just landed in her chest like a mortar round with the safety pin pulled. She finished her rounds at 2:47 a.m. Adjusted the bed. Changed the catheter drainage. Checked the ventilator settings one more time. Her movements were fluid, practiced, the kind of automatic competence that came from doing something your body understood even when your brain was screaming. By the time she clocked out at the end of her shift, her hands were completely steady. Dr. Gabriel arrived at morning rounds at 7:15 a.m. He was the kind of man whose presence made the air pressure change. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of jawline that could cut glass, the type of physician who'd built his entire career on being right, on having the authority to declare cases hopeless and then prove it. He swept into room 347 with 3 residents trailing behind him like remoras following a shark. His white coat was pristine. His stethoscope was top of the line. His confidence was the kind that only came from never being questioned. "Commander Marcus Webb," he said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Motor vehicle accident with traumatic brain injury in theater, Mosul, Iraq. 5 years post-injury. No cognitive function. No purposeful movement. No recovery trajectory." He turned to the residents. "This is what futile care looks like. The family has been informed that rehabilitation is no longer a realistic outcome. He's maintained on comfort measures pending natural decline." Katie stood at the foot of the bed, her chart in her hands. She'd been introduced to Dr. Gabriel exactly once, during her orientation paperwork signing. He hadn't looked at her then. He didn't look at her now. "Any changes?" he asked, addressing the senior resident rather than the nurse. The resident flipped through the chart. "Vital stable. No new developments. Nursing notes are routine." Katie said nothing. Stood perfectly still. Waited. Dr. Gabriel stood, smoothed his coat. "Keep him comfortable. If there's any change in his condition, and there won't be, call neurology. Otherwise, he's a teaching case in the natural history of catastrophic TBI." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Has anyone explained to the night shift that we're not miracle workers?" It wasn't a question directed at her. But Katie understood it was a message. Webb was a closed file. Don't waste time on closed files. Don't hope. Don't try unconventional approaches. Just maintain. Just document. Just accept the verdict that had been passed down from a man with silver hair and the kind of authority that came from being right so many times that he'd forgotten how to be wrong. After they left, Katie sat in the plastic chair beside Webb's bed. Looked at his face. Looked at the tattoo on his arm. "Angel of Mosul," she said quietly. Just speaking it aloud. Her voice sounded different than it had in 3 years, lower, rougher, like something waking up that had been sleeping for too long. "That's what they called me." Webb's pupils remained fixed and dilated, responding to light the way a body responds on autopilot. There was no recognition there. No spark. No indication that the man inside that broken brain could hear her or remember her or knew that she'd carried him 3 miles through enemy fire to an extraction point, stopping twice to stop the bleeding, stopping again when his breath came shallow and fast, whispering to him in the dark that she had him, that the 160th SAW would be on the landing zone in 14 minutes, that he needed to hold on. She had held on too. Held him together with pressure and profanity and pure stubborn refusal to let him die in a collapsed market district. That had been another lifetime. That had been before she took shrapnel to her left leg and spent 6 months in Bethesda learning how to walk again. That had been before she'd stood in a Pentagon office while a general explained to her that her service record would be classified, that her operations in the Sinaloa area would remain restricted indefinitely, that she should consider a medical discharge and begin a civilian life. She'd accepted it. Rebuilt herself. Changed her name to the one on the discharge papers, Katie, from Catherine. Worked her way through her RN prerequisite at a community college. Moved to San Diego because it was far enough from the coast where she'd grown up and close enough to an ocean that didn't remind her of anything except water. And now. Katie pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. She had 13 minutes before the next nurse would come through for vitals check. 13 minutes of time that wasn't scheduled, wasn't documented, wasn't supervised. She took out her phone and navigated to a voice memo she'd recorded months ago. A woman's voice, young, bright, speaking with the particular enthusiasm of a teenage girl who believed the world was still a place where good things happened. "Hi Dad, it's Emma. Mom said you're at a new hospital? That's nice. San Diego sounds warm. I'm making donuts for the school bake sale tomorrow. Remember how I used to help you make them on leave? I made them exactly the way you taught me. I hope you're doing okay. I hope someone's telling you stories about home. I love you." Katie pressed play. She held the phone close to Webb's ear. The ventilator wheezed. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. And then, subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, his right pupil dilated fractionally. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then it contracted back to its resting size. Katie documented it in the chart. Exactly what she'd observed. Exactly what could be clinically measured and recorded and defended. She wrote, pupil response to auditory stimulus, daughter's voice recording. Right pupil dilation noted at timestamp 8:32. Sustained for approximately 3 seconds. No other motor response. She closed the chart. Pulled the chair back to its original position. By the time the next shift nurse arrived at 8:45, everything was exactly as it should be. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Katie Morrison now understood exactly what Dr. Gabriel had meant when he said that Webb was a teaching case in futility. Because now she knew that some part of the man in that bed, some small, buried portion of Marcus Webb's consciousness, could still hear. Could still respond. Could still reach across 5 years of darkness and touch the place where his daughter lived, where his unit lived, where that nurse with the slight limp and the steady hands lived. And if she tried to build on that response, if she pushed too hard or hoped too obviously, Dr. Gabriel would shut her down in ways she wouldn't see coming until she was already neutralized. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of clinical precision that only a teaching hospital could manufacture. 20 residents and 4 attending physicians filled the amphitheater seats at Riverside Community, the tiered rows creating a perfect geometry of white coats and expensive shoes. Dr. Gabriel stood at the podium with the posture of a man who had never questioned his own rightness, and Katie stood at the back near the exit, her hands folded, waiting. The projector hummed to life. Her chart notes appeared on the screen, magnified across the wall in letters large enough that everyone could read her own words thrown back at her. Nurse Morrison believed she observed pupillary response to auditory stimuli. This is what happens when emotional nursing replaces evidence-based medicine. Dr. Gabriel didn't need to read the words aloud. His audience already understood the setup. He turned toward Katie, his chin tilted slightly downward in that particular way men use when they're about to deliver judgment from above. "Ms. Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the smooth certainty of someone who had never lost an argument in a room he controlled. "Your community college curriculum, did it cover the difference between wishful thinking and neurological assessment?" The laughter started immediately. Soft at first, then spreading through the amphitheater like contagion. A resident in the 3rd row actually covered his mouth. An attending physician smiled into his coffee. Katie watched the laughter ripple outward, and her breathing remained steady. Not because she was calm. Because she had been trained to breathe steady while rounds of ammunition landed 50 meters away. She didn't clench her jaw. She didn't flush red. She didn't retreat or apologize or offer an explanation that would give him the satisfaction of her scrambling. Instead, she walked down the aisle. The laughter died almost immediately. People sensed something in the shift of her weight, something in the way her footsteps moved with purpose rather than deference. She descended those steps with the kind of deliberate motion that made the residents lean back slightly in their seats, as though something predatory had entered their amphitheater and they were suddenly aware of it. She stopped 3 feet from Dr. Gabriel. Close enough to speak without raising her voice. Close enough that the 30 people surrounding them had to strain slightly to hear her. "Commander Webb's pupils dilated when I played his daughter's voice," Katie said. Her voice didn't waver. Didn't plead. Didn't ask permission to exist. That's more response than 5 years of your prognosis provided. She turned and walked away. Her footsteps echoed off the polished tile, a sound like judgment rendered, irreversible and final. Nobody in that amphitheater spoke. The projector hummed. Dr. Gabriel's face had gone the color of old marble. 3 days passed with surgical precision. Katie worked her shifts. She bathed patients, changed fours, documented vital signs. She did everything with the same quiet competence that had kept her alive in Mosul when everything else was falling apart. She didn't mention Webb. She didn't approach his room beyond her assigned responsibilities. She waited. On Monday during lunch rush, the third-floor vending machine alcove filled with the particular chaos of a teaching hospital during midday, a nurse pushing a med cart stacked with medication trays, 2 residents grabbing coffee between rounds, an attending scrolling through his phone while waiting for his sandwich to drop. Katie fed coins into the machine. The mechanical hiss of the change slot echoed in the narrow space. Dr. Gabriel appeared beside her like he'd been planning this moment. "I'm curious about something, Morrison." His voice cut through the ambient noise with calculated sharpness. Loud enough that everyone within 10 feet could hear him. "Does your associate's degree somehow trump my Johns Hopkins Neurology Fellowship? Or are you just that arrogant?" The nurse with the med cart slowed her pace. The 2 residents stopped talking mid-sentence. Katie watched the coffee cup drop into the dispenser with a soft plastic click. She retrieved her coffee. Turned to face him. Her expression was neutral the way a lake's surface is neutral when it's actually recording everything moving above it. "I'm just a nurse who reads monitors, Dr. Gabriel," she said. "His heart rate increases 8 beats per minute when I mention Mosul. That's data, not arrogance." She walked past him. The residents watched her go. The attending looked up from his phone, his eyebrows raised slightly. Dr. Gabriel's jaw worked silently, like he was preparing to respond and then deciding against it at the last possible moment. What they didn't know was that Katie had already made a decision in that moment. She would document everything that happened with Commander Webb from this point forward. Every twitch, every heart rate change, every microsecond of neural activity. She would build a record so meticulous that even Gabriel's position at Johns Hopkins couldn't dismiss it. The following Monday arrived with the kind of institutional punctuality that made everything feel predetermined. Katie was at the nurse's station during her shift when the security guard approached. He carried a sealed envelope with the kind of careful neutrality that people use when delivering something unpleasant. He handed it to her in front of 4 staff members, deliberately, visibly, ensuring that everyone understood this was official business. Inside the envelope, typed in the cold precision of hospital administration, a formal written warning from Dr. Gabriel citing deviation from established care protocols and unsupervised experimental interventions. The threat was specific: immediate escort removal from the hospital if she continued. Katie read it once. Folded it with precision. Slid it into her scrub pocket. She didn't let her hands shake. She didn't let her face show anything. She simply turned back to her charting as though the warning was already irrelevant, as though she'd absorbed it and filed it away and moved past it in the time it took to fold paper. That night, during a shift when the floor was understaffed and Dr. Gabriel's loyalists were off duty, Katie walked into Commander Webb's room carrying her phone. The screens around his bed beeped their steady rhythm: oxygen saturation, heart rate, blood pressure, all the data that Dr. Gabriel insisted meant nothing. She played a recording of helicopter rotor wash. The sound of extraction. The acoustic signature of rescue. Webb's heart rate jumped to 94 beats per minute. His eyelids fluttered. The machines registered what his brain was trying to tell them, even as the damage from Mosul kept him locked in silence. Katie leaned close, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "I've got you, Commander. You're safe." His right hand moved 3 inches across the bedsheet. She documented it immediately: the time, the stimulus, the response, the precise distance the hand traveled. Medical evidence. Data. The thing that Dr. Gabriel had to respect even if he despised her for gathering it. She was still writing when Dr. Gabriel appeared in the doorway at 2:07 a.m. He must have had someone watching her schedule. Someone calling him the moment she went off the normal rotation. The thought didn't surprise Katie anymore. This was institutional warfare, and she'd learned years ago that institutions protect themselves with the same ruthlessness that soldiers use to protect their units. "You were given a direct order, Morrison," he said. Katie didn't look up from her charting. She continued writing, her pen moving with the same steady precision it had used in field reports under fire. "He's responding. Look at the strips." Dr. Gabriel stepped closer. His voice dropped until it was meant only for her, a confidence between adversaries. "I've reassigned nurses Chen and Rodriguez from this wing. I've adjusted the schedule so only my selected staff cover Webb's care. You're isolated now. One more violation, and you're gone." Katie's pen paused. She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes with that same cold, flat stare that had silenced the amphitheater. She said nothing. Sometimes silence is a more complete response than any words could ever be. The next morning, Katie noticed the schedule. Chen was transferred to the telemetry unit. Rodriguez reassigned to post-op. 2 nurses she'd never worked with were now covering Webb's routine care. The monitoring was subtle but absolute. Gabriel had effectively locked her out of any extended contact with her patient. She couldn't play voice recordings. She couldn't run stimulus tests. She couldn't do anything except watch through a window as his care proceeded according to protocol, static and predictable and useless. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Katie understood, with absolute clarity, what Dr. Gabriel was doing. He wasn't just trying to stop her from helping Webb. He was trying to break her resolve by making her complicit in her own failure. By forcing her to watch while doing nothing. Security appeared at 7:42 a.m., during shift change when the ICU was a controlled chaos of departing night nurses and arriving day staff. The guard, the same one who'd watched the vending machine confrontation, walked directly to Katie's supply cart outside Webb's room and handed her a sealed envelope. His name tag read Martinez. He didn't make eye contact. "From administration," he said quietly. Katie didn't open it in front of him. She waited until he left, then turned the envelope over in her hands. The paper inside was institutional cream, heavy stock. Her name typed formally, Catherine Morrison, RN. The letterhead bore the hospital seal. She read it standing in the hallway, her jaw tightening incrementally with each sentence, but her face remained flat, a surface of still water concealing everything beneath. The letter was signed by Dr. Gabriel and countersigned by the Chief of Hospital Operations. Katie folded it once, twice, and placed it in her scrub pocket without changing expression. A resident passing by glanced at her nervously, reading something in her stillness that made them quicken their pace. She finished her shift that morning by washing Webb's face with a soft cloth, moving with the same precision she'd always used, no hurry, no hesitation. The morning light came through the window in geometric patterns, catching the dust particles floating in the antiseptic air. She traced the outline of the tattoo on his forearm, her fingers hovering just above the skin without touching. *K.E. Morrison, Angel of Mosul. His eyes didn't track her movement. His pupils remained fixed and dilated, the same as yesterday, the same as 5 years ago. "I'm still here," she said quietly, to no one who could hear her. By noon, the first restructuring had taken effect. Nurses who had been assigned to Webb's care, Yolanda Chen and Marcus Rodriguez, both of whom had documented Katie's observations in their own notes, appeared in the schedule with new assignments across the hospital. Yolanda was transferred to the surgical floor, effective immediately. Marcus to pediatrics. The message was surgical precision disguised as routine staffing adjustments. Katie found the new schedule posted on the break room bulletin board. She read it once, memorized it, and moved on without comment. 3 other nurses were clustered near the coffee station. They stopped talking when she entered. "Fresh pot," one of them offered carefully. Katie poured a cup she didn't want. The coffee had a bitter, burnt smell, the smell of something left too long on a heating element, still technically hot but no longer drinkable. She drank it anyway. The taste matched the morning perfectly. Dr. Gabriel didn't appear until afternoon rounds, moving through the ICU with his team of younger physicians trailing like pilot fish. he stopped at Webb's door and glanced at Katie, who was adjusting the 4-line drip rate as part of her comfort care duties. His expression held the careful neutrality of a chess player observing an opponent's move. "The room is attending supervised only from this point forward," he announced to his team, loud enough for Katie to hear. "No independent assessments. No undocumented observations. We maintain protocol integrity." He paused, then added, "The data on this patient is 5 years solid. Some people struggle with accepting established prognosis." His words had the texture of velvet wrapped around steel, not a direct insult, but an anatomy lesson in how carefully he could dismantle her credibility in public. The residents took notes. None of them looked at Katie. When he left, she continued adjusting the foredrip as if he hadn't spoken. The new ICU schedule posted that evening showed Katie assigned to Webb for precisely 30 minutes each morning and 30 minutes each evening, the bare minimum to maintain continuity of care without allowing her meaningful access to decision-making. The intervening hours would be covered by Dr. Gabriel's chosen nurses, Diane Russo, who had been pulled from her previous rotation specifically for this assignment, and Thomas Chen, a newer graduate who'd never questioned a physician's judgment in his 18 months of practice. Both were competent nurses. Both would follow protocol exactly as written. Neither would push back. Katie photographed the schedule with her phone and stared at the images for several minutes in the break room, then deleted them. The information didn't need to be stored. She'd already committed it to memory, a skill learned years ago in desert heat, learning layouts of buildings and guard rotations and the exact moment when predictable patterns shifted toward danger. The shift manager, Patricia Okonkwo, found her there. "I wanted to say." Patricia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Some of us saw what happened. With the code. We all know what you did." Katie didn't respond immediately. She'd learned that silence created space for others to fill with truth. "Gabriel's worked here for 15 years, Patricia continued. He has relationships. Connections. And Webb's case has been part of his research for, I don't know, maybe a decade? There's funding attached. Publications. His entire reputation is built on understanding," Katie said quietly. "His reputation is built on understanding that patients in persistent vegetative states don't recover. That's his area of expertise." Patricia's face flushed slightly. "I'm just saying, be careful. He's made calls. The board is considering policy changes. He's positioning this as patient safety, but—" "Thank you," Katie said. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was acknowledgement of a warning delivered as kindly as circumstances allowed. That night, after her shift ended, Katie sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes. The engine was off. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. The garage smelled like concrete and motor oil and the rain that had begun falling sometime after 5 o'clock. Through the windshield, she watched water stream down the glass in rivulets that moved with the physics of gravity and wind pressure. Her phone buzzed. A message from Derek, her 17-year-old son, * late practice. Eating at Jake's. Home by 10. *. She typed back a thumbs-up emoji and deleted the exchange. Webb's room had been reclassified. The restriction notice was now printed on a yellow label attached to his chart, * attending physician supervision required for all interventions. * The label was placed at 3:15 p.m., just before Dr. Gabriel concluded his afternoon rounds. By evening, a second notice appeared on the room's door itself, visible to anyone entering, * authorized personnel only. *. This was strategic sabotage disguised as protocol enforcement. Gabriel wasn't just removing her access, he was making her presence questionable. Every time she entered that room, she would be violating the visual hierarchy of authority posted on the door frame. Every nurse and resident who saw her would register her as an exception to a clearly stated rule. And in a hospital, following rules separated the competent from the dangerous. Breaking them, even with justification, marked you as unreliable. The next morning, Katie arrived for her 6:30 a.m. shift and found Dr. Gabriel standing outside Webb's room. He was reviewing the chart, his reading glasses positioned low on his nose. He looked up as she approached. 30 minutes, he said. Not as an instruction, but as a statement of fact. Your window is 6 to 6:30. Hygiene only. If he has any episodes during that time, you page immediately. You don't intervene. You don't document your observations. You comfort. That's all. Katie met his gaze without flinching. The silence between them lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, quietly, he moved his left pupil yesterday. Responded to auditory stimuli at 103 decibels. Dr. Gabriel's jaw tightened. No, he didn't. His pupils dilated when I played his daughter's voice. Twice. I documented it in the chart. Those notes are being removed, Gabriel said. They represent speculation, not clinical observation. They don't meet the threshold for neurologically significant response. Katie didn't argue. Arguing required belief that her evidence mattered, and Gabriel had already made clear that it didn't, not to him, not to the institution that validated his authority. Instead, she simply said, I'm going on break, and walked past him down the corridor, leaving him standing there holding a chart that documented a truth he'd already decided was impossible. That afternoon, the official memo circulated through the ICU, revised protocols for persistent vegetative state management, effective immediately. The document ran 16 pages. It was authored by Dr. Marcus Gabriel, MD, in consultation with the hospital's legal department. Every one of Katie's methods, auditory stimulation with personal recordings, tactile response documentation, conversation as therapeutic intervention, was now classified as unvalidated interventions without evidence-based outcome correlation. But that wasn't the worst part. Day 43 arrived with the kind of clarity that comes from institutional certainty. Katie stood at the sink in the staff locker room, her hands trembling not from fear but from restraint, the trembling of someone holding back something that wanted to break free. The hospital had made its decision. Dr. Gabriel had reorganized the entire ICU schedule around a simple principle: Katie Morrison would be permitted to wash Commander Webb's body, adjust his linens, empty his catheter bag. Hygiene care only. All medical interventions, medication administration, vital sign documentation, neurological assessment, belonged exclusively to Gabriel's handpicked nurses. The ones who followed protocol. The ones who didn't ask questions about pupil dilation or therapeutic voice recordings. She arrived at Webb's room at 6:47 a.m. on day 43. The sun hadn't yet broken the eastern horizon. The room smelled of antiseptic and something else, the particular staleness of a body that hadn't moved on its own in 5 years. Katie checked the monitors. Heart rate 62. Blood pressure stable. O2 sat 98%. Everything normal. Everything dead. The morning proceeded with ritual precision. She sponged his arms, working around the 4 lines, trying not to look at the tattoo on his left forearm. Angel of Mosul. Sometimes she caught herself staring at it for longer than professional distance allowed. That name had meant something once. That name had meant she was still alive to carry another living weight through burning air. By 2:30 p.m., Katie had finished her assigned tasks. She'd prepared the evening medications for Gabriel's nurses to administer. She'd documented nothing beyond what was required. She'd become smaller, quieter, the kind of nurse who moved through the hospital like someone erasing herself one shift at a time. The parking garage was waiting for her. 3 more hours until her shift ended. 3 more hours of watching other people touch her patient. At 2:47 p.m., the monitor alarmed. The sound cut through the entire floor like a blade. Katie's head snapped up from the medication cart where she'd been organizing supplies 3 rooms down. Ventricular fibrillation. The rhythm that meant the heart had stopped its organized beat and begun quivering, a muscle twitching uselessly, pushing no blood, delivering no oxygen, killing. She moved before her conscious mind caught up. Her legs already running. Her hands already reaching for the code cart stationed in Webb's hallway. The code team would arrive in 90 seconds. She knew this. She'd timed it 37 times. The nearest cardiologist was 3 floors down. The surgical resident was in the cafeteria. 90 seconds was the distance between heartbeat and brain death. Katie burst into the room. Webb's body jerked as the first set of defibrillator pads caught, 200 joules of electricity meant to reset a heart that had forgotten how to beat. Nothing. His body went rigid, then slack. The monitor still screamed its flat, high-frequency protest. 90 seconds, maybe 80 now. Gabriel's assigned nurse, a rigid woman named Patricia who'd been instructed to maintain Katie's isolation, stood frozen at the bedside. Her hands hovered. Her mouth opened without sound emerging. The crash cart had arrived but no doctor was pushing it. No attending was shouting orders. Katie's hands moved on their own. Muscle memory. Years of training her body for moments when thinking would waste seconds. She grabbed the scalpel from the crash cart, a number 15 blade, cold steel that felt like an extension of bone. The training manual called it an emergency thoracotomy. The procedure that wasn't supposed to happen in an ICU. The intervention that violated every protocol Gabriel had written. She didn't hesitate. Hesitation was surrender. The incision went through skin, through ribs, into the chest cavity. Fast, precise, the kind of cut that comes from having done it before under far worse conditions. Blood well dark and immediate. Patricia gasped. Someone, the ward clerk, maybe, had hit the overhead page. Code blue. Trauma 1. The surgical team was 3 minutes away. Katie's hands opened Webb's pericardium. She could feel the heart through her fingertips, that slick muscular organ that had forgotten its job. 75 beats per minute was what she needed. The electrical chaos had to stop. Manual compression sometimes worked when electricity wouldn't. Hands were more patient than machines. She began. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm of her compressions matched no music except the one her own body remembered from a place called Forward Operating Base Shank. From a casualty collection point where she'd held open a chest cavity while a medevac bird spun up rotors. From the only time she'd ever stopped being what doctors called a nurse and started being what soldiers called irreplaceable. O2 sat climbed. 83. 86. 91. The surgical team arrived at 2 minutes 56 seconds. The trauma surgeon, Dr. Keisha Walsh, competent and quick, took one look at what Katie had done and didn't hesitate either. She nodded once. Kept her hand steady. Took over the manual compression while Katie stepped back, her scrub soaked dark with blood that wasn't hers. What happened? Walsh snapped. VFIB. Failed defibrillation. 90 seconds, Katie answered. Her voice was level. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Good call, Walsh said. It wasn't a compliment. It was recognition. The kind one warrior gives another. They got him to the OR in 4 minutes. Sinus rhythm came back 30 seconds after Walsh took over the chest compressions. Webb's heart remembered how to beat. The color returned to his face, not the pink of health, but the color of oxygenated blood, the fundamental difference between living and what he'd been before. Katie stood in the hallway outside the ICU, her scrub soaked, her hand still moving with phantom compressions she couldn't stop. Patricia hadn't said a word. The ward clerk was staring at her with an expression Katie couldn't read. Someone would call Dr. Gabriel. Someone would report what had happened. The protocol violation would be documented. The unauthorized surgical intervention would be written up. She didn't care anymore. Not about protocols. Not about Gabriel. Not about the carefully constructed distance between a nurse who could save a life and a nurse who was allowed to. 3 hours later, Webb was back in his room, stabilized, sedated, his chest wrapped tight around fresh surgical closure. Dr. Walsh had taken over his care temporarily, a complication requiring surgical oversight. Gabriel was nowhere to be found. Katie stood at Webb's bedside at 6:15 p.m. She'd scrubbed the blood from her hands, changed into a fresh set of scrubs. Protocol said she should go home. Her shift had ended. But she needed to document something. One thing. One moment that mattered. His right hand lay at his side, the one with the tattoo. At 6:22 p.m., his fingers moved. Not a reflex. Not a random neural firing. A deliberate curl, slow and sustained, reaching toward the sound of her voice even though she hadn't been speaking. His hand was reaching for something. Or someone. Katie pulled out a pen. She opened his chart. She wrote, purposeful right hand movement. Appears to respond to auditory stimuli. Recommend continued voice-based therapeutic intervention. Significant neurological change documented 6:22 p.m. She signed it. Katie Morrison, RN. The violation was complete. She documented clinical change outside Gabriel's restricted protocols. She'd suggested continued non-standard care. She'd put her name on evidence that his prognosis, 5 years of certainty that Webb was beyond recovery, had been wrong. The code team had broken protocol. She'd broken protocol. They'd done it anyway. At 6:47 p.m., someone knocked on the ICU door. Not a staff member. Not a doctor. The security guard who'd escorted her from the building 2 hours earlier when Gabriel discovered what she'd done in that moment between alarm and resuscitation. He had a termination letter in his hand. Countersigned by hospital administration. Effective immediately. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Dr. Gabriel wants you off the floor right now." Katie picked up the letter. She read it once. Gross violation of surgical protocols. Continued insubordination. Liability concerns. All of it true. All of it deliberate. She looked at the security guard. His name was Carlos, she remembered. He had a daughter in nursing school, and nodded once. "I understand," she said. She packed her locker. Stethoscope. A photo of Derek from 2 years ago. A coffee mug that said "Nurses make better lovers" that she'd received as a joke from the surgical team at her last hospital. She took the box to her car in the parking garage and sat with her forehead pressed against the steering wheel while the sun finished setting over San Diego. 2 hours passed. The garage filled with evening shadows. At 7:04 p.m., her son Derek tapped on the window. He was holding something wrapped in brown paper, something the size of a shadow box. His face had that determined expression he got when he'd made a decision that would change something. "Get out of the car, Mom," he said when she rolled down the window. "We're going back inside." Katie wanted to say no. She wanted to drive home and sit in the dark and let the day become history. But her 17-year-old son was holding what looked like her past, and his voice carried an authority that reminded her he'd inherited something from both his parents, the refusal to accept that the game was over. She got out of the car. She followed him back toward the hospital entrance where security was changing shifts. Derek pushed past the front desk. He moved with purpose toward the 3rd floor. He didn't ask permission. Derek found her at dawn, engine cold, forehead still pressed against the steering wheel. 2 hours she'd been there. The termination box sat on the passenger seat like a coffin in miniature. He didn't ask questions. 17 years old, and he'd learned long ago that his mother didn't break, she just stopped moving. He opened the driver's side door, felt the cold air spill out, saw the way her hands gripped the wheel so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Mom." She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were focused but empty, like someone looking at the world through reinforced glass. "I need to tell you something," Derek said. "And you need to listen without talking." Katie turned to face him. The parking garage lights cast her face in silver and shadow. Derek sat on the passenger seat, the termination box balanced on his lap. "Your discharge papers. The ones from Walter Reed. I found them 3 years ago when we moved. Shrapnel. Your left leg. Mosul." He paused. Each word landed like a precision strike. "You never told me." Katie's jaw tightened. Nothing else moved. You came home and became a nurse, Derek continued, his voice steady in a way only teenagers who'd learned to read their parents' silences could manage. You never mentioned command. Never mentioned the unit. Never mentioned that you were decorated. You just became a civilian. And then Commander Webb showed up as a patient, and suddenly I understood why you were different around him. Why you fought so hard for him. Katie's breathing deepened but remained controlled. I'm going to the board meeting, Derek said. I'm going to bring something. And I need you to understand that I'm doing this whether you're ready or not. He left before she could respond. At 9 a.m., Derek Morrison walked through the front doors of Riverside Community Hospital carrying a shadow box. Inside, a silver star. 2 bronze stars with Valor. A purple heart. A Navy Cross. All of them earned in a desert Katie had never mentioned, in a war she'd compartmentalized so thoroughly that her own son had discovered her medals by accident while packing boxes. The security guard at the front desk, the same one who'd escorted Katie out the day before, looked up. Recognition crossed his face. Not of Derek, but of the shadow box. Of what it meant. I need to get to the board meeting, Derek said. Room 401. The guard stood. Follow me. Conference room 401 smelled like stale coffee and the particular anxiety that fills spaces where institutional power consolidates. Dr. Gabriel stood at the head of a mahogany table, presenting slides. 23 people occupied the room, hospital administrators, board members, legal counsel. Patricia Hensley, the CEO, sat in the front row, her expression the carefully neutral mask of someone waiting for a problem to reveal itself. Derek pushed open the door. This meeting is closed, Dr. Gabriel said without turning around. Security. I'm not interrupting, Derek said. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed forward. My mom is Commander Katie Morrison, and you need to see these. He set the shadow box on the table. The room went absolutely still. Not the comfortable silence of professional meetings, but the suffocating stillness of a moment pivoting on its hinge. A woman in a navy polo shirt stood, a SEAL liaison who'd been present for Webb's case file review. Her name was Commander Price. Her eyes moved across the medals, and her face went pale the way only people trained to recognize combat decorations can. A visiting nurse from the VA, a woman named Chen who'd consulted on Veterans Affairs protocols, moved to the records department immediately. Her hands trembled as she pulled Webb's classified file, the one marked with redaction after redaction, clearance level restricted. She read aloud, her voice shaking. Force Recon. 2nd Battalion. 5 deployments. Mosul operations? She trailed off, then continued. Mission classification, JSOC level. Operations Officer for Task Force 121. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of institutional understanding shifting. Commander Price stood and named each decoration like a ceremony. Her voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what each medal represented. Silver Star, she said. For Valor under fire during the Battle of Jolon. 2 bronze stars with Valor, 1 for coordinating the extraction of 7 American personnel from an ambush site in the Sanjin sector, the 2nd for leadership during a classified operation in Mosul. Purple Heart, twice, for wounds sustained in combat. And... She paused. Her eyes went to Derek. Navy Cross. For the Mosul extraction. 7 lives saved. Including the life of Commander Marcus Webb. An FBI agent who'd been present for Webb's intelligence background briefing stood next. Commander Morrison's operational files remain partially classified. Her unit designation, Force Recon, was attached to JSOC Task Force 121. Her extraction team was composed of 3 Marines and 2 Navy SEAL advisors. The mission she led in 2019 targeted high-value Sunni insurgent networks operating in 3 provinces. That operation was considered successful. Exceptionally successful. The agent sat down. Dr. Gabriel's face drained of color. Blood retreated from his features like an ocean receding before a tsunami. His mouth opened and closed silently. His hand moved toward the presentation remote, then fell. The slides behind him, his carefully constructed argument about revised protocols, about maintaining institutional standards, about the importance of hierarchical decision-making in medicine, suddenly looked like the work of a man diagnosing his own irrelevance. Patricia Hensley stood. "Dr. Gabriel. My office. Now." He didn't move immediately. He stared at the shadow box. The Navy Cross caught the fluorescent light and threw it back at him like a judgment. The meeting adjourned in fragments. Board members spoke in whispers. The Navy SEAL liaison approached Derek and said quietly, "Your mother's sacrifice doesn't need defending by her son. But I'm grateful it's being witnessed. Tell her." She paused. "Tell her the unit remembers Angel 6. By noon, Riverside Community Hospital had become a place of rapid institutional recalibration. The story spread through every corridor. The quiet nurse with a limp was a decorated Marine. The patient she saved was the same one she'd carried through enemy fire. The chief of neurology had fired her for performing the exact kind of battlefield improvisation taught to force-reckon Marines. 2 residents found Dr. Gabriel in the hallway and asked if it was true he'd threatened her with security. He didn't answer. He walked past them as if they were furniture. By 3 p.m., a hospital attorney was reviewing the termination paperwork. By 5 p.m., the attorney had uncovered the inconsistencies. Gabriel's own code blue note showed he'd called time of death before Katie intervened, which meant she hadn't violated protocol. She'd acted in a moment when protocol had already failed. She'd exceeded her authority in the exact way military medicine trains people to exceed their authority, when the alternative is death. The board met in emergency session that evening. 3 nurses submitted written statements. One of them, Chen, was explicit. Dr. Gabriel had instructed her specifically to prevent Katie from accessing Webb's care. It was surveillance masquerading as protocol. Commander Price submitted a written statement confirming that Katie's thoracotomy technique was consistent with standard force-reckon medical training. Lieutenant Harris, the VA neurologist, provided Webb's updated assessments. Post-resuscitation improvement was unprecedented. The patient who'd been declared hopeless 5 years ago was showing cognitive response, intentional movement, emerging language. By 8 p.m., the board voted unanimously to terminate Dr. Gabriel for cause. Abuse of authority. Retaliation. Compromising patient care through surveillance and institutional manipulation. Patricia Hensley delivered the termination personally at 8:47 p.m. in Dr. Gabriel's office. She left his office in silence. He remained at his desk for 17 minutes, then began packing his belongings into a cardboard box. The next morning, at 7:15 a.m., the same security guard who'd escorted Katie out the day before arrived at Dr. Gabriel's office. He carried an identical cardboard box, white, unmarked, the kind used for terminated employees. He set it on Gabriel's desk. "Your nameplate. Your coffee mug. Your diploma. I believe you know the way out, Dr. Gabriel." Gabriel walked through the ICU for the last time at 7:34 a.m. Katie was already at the nurse's station, reinstated that morning with back pay and a formal letter of apology from Patricia Hensley. Her new assignment, Medical Director of Unconventional Patient Recovery Protocols, with funding approved to document her treatment methodologies as a case study. She'd been authorized to oversee all aspects of Commander Webb's continued care. She didn't look at Gabriel as he passed. She was reviewing Webb's morning vitals: oxygen saturation 97%, sinus rhythm stable, pupil response improving. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd never doubted themselves, who'd simply waited for the world to catch up to what they already knew. Gabriel continued walking. By week's end, he was working the front desk at a veterinary clinic in a strip mall in El Cajon, checking in Labrador retrievers for their vaccinations, scheduling follow-up appointments, speaking in the quiet voice of someone who'd learned that institutional power is a house built on the assumption that nobody will look closely at the foundation. Katie Morrison didn't watch him go. She was already focused on the work that mattered, a Marine who'd been asleep for 5 years, now waking. A recovery that everyone had declared impossible, now measurable in millimeters of progress. A second chance earned not through institutional validation, but through the refusal to accept that hope and protocol are ever the same thing. The monitor beeped steadily. The ventilator wheezed its rhythm. And in that rhythm was the sound of everything Gabriel had tried to suppress, finally, irrevocably, finding its voice. Subscribe to the Code Whisperers for stories about the ones who save lives in the dark, the heroes nobody sees until the moment they have to. Like this video if you believe in second chances. Comment below, what would you have done in Katie's position?